All right. Hello, everybody. This is Rebecca Miller. I am the main admin and founder of the Facebook group, VA Assumable Home Loans. And I'm here with Craig and with Randy. I'll let them introduce themselves as well.
Hello, Rebecca. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good. I'm Craig O'Boyle. I am one of the founding partners and owners of Assumption Solutions.
Cool. And I'm Randy Zimnak, and I'm business partners with Rebecca. I am a realtor. So is Craig, actually. Craig is a realtor too. And yeah, we are managing the Facebook group together. We're basically business partners on the Facebook group. And also, we recently launched AssumableSales.com. That's also our website as well. So welcome.
Great. So we're here to answer some questions that I commonly get in the group from both buyers and sellers. So we will just jump right in. Okay, so one of the first questions I often get is, especially now, what does the new VA circular mean?
Okay. So basically a VA circular is designed to be guidance to lending institutions, buyers, all that kind of stuff about their programs and things like that. And so here in the middle of August, the VA basically kind of came out and clarified their stance on secondary financing that would go in place behind the assumption of the first mortgage. That is kind of a huge topic in this industry. I mean, obviously the main question I think I field, and probably you guys as well, is regarding the ability for somebody to finance the gap, which is the difference between the purchase price and the loan being assumed, which in what we see is averaging $50,000 plus. So it makes people have to have a lot of down payment to come in there. When we started doing this, kind of universally, it was something that servicers were not allowing, which was not allowing anybody to get a second mortgage to come up with the difference there in the gap. And as we started going forward in this process, we started to have some servicers say they would allow secondary financing of the gap, not all of them, and it kind of was at their discretion. But then that sort of got the brakes put on when, whether true or not, word got out that the VA, if secondary financing was going to be used, would like to see that financing be assumable as well, which didn't exist. There's no second mortgages in place that the financing was assumable. So that put the brakes on that market. And to date, we have not seen gap financing be a major player in the market of assumptions. Well, here we are, middle of August, VA comes out and basically says they do not have a problem with secondary financing as long as it doesn't affect the priority of the VA loan in terms of being a first mortgage. And basically, there's no major requirement that funding be assumable. So what that means is now lenders are going to kind of have the ability to design a product that would work for gap financing. And that's very exciting because that can potentially bring a lot more people in there. Now, I can't speak to what the guidelines are going to be on those loans, whether or not they're going to be limited to a certain total LTV, like 90%, rates and stuff like that, what they're going to look like. This is just really taking place. But at the end of the day, buyers will probably be able to start getting this going forward. They're going to have to qualify with the blended rate of the two mortgages because the second mortgage will be significantly higher likely than the assumed first mortgage. And they're still going to probably have to have some skin in the game because I don't expect to see 100% financing on the total package. So that is the major change. We're very excited about it. We think it's going to grow this market quite a bit. So.
Yeah, and I would add is I agree. It's a really good thing for this niche in our industry for the consumer on both sides, buyers and sellers, because sellers should be able to get more attention, more buyers that are able to offer on their property too. So it's a win for both sides. as far as interest rates, though, you do have to remember, right, that on the secondary financing, those rates usually are going to be about 2 to 3 points higher. So if today's rate is 6%, just for easy math, you might be getting quoted 8%, maybe even 9% on that secondary financing, right? So just be aware of that. And the best thing to do, honestly, and I think what the game changer with this too is that the challenge up to this point is that when we, work with consumers looking to buy properties with an assumable loan, we always wanted to talk to one of our lenders anyway, right? To get pre-approved, to see where they can even fall in based on today's rates, and what do they qualify for? Because when we submit an offer, to a listing agent or the seller, they want to know that you at least are able to qualify for a loan, period, right? Then you're going to have to get qualified, of course, with the seller's servicer as well. However, what I'm getting at is that a lot of times when you were speaking to your lender and you mentioned the gap, they were like, whoa, we can't really help you there, right? If you were to tell them like, hey, I'm considering buying a property using an assumable loan. I also still want to get pre-approved because you never know, I might still buy traditionally. And can you help me with the gap financing if I go the assumable loan because I don't have $200,000 extra, right? And then that lender, their answer would have been, no, I can't help you because of what Craig mentioned. Well, now I would guess most lenders' answer now is going to be yes, I can help you, right? So that's a good thing because the same person you're speaking to in terms of your lender for a traditional purchase potentially is the same person that can potentially then give you the secondary financing as well, which is really good. It makes it a lot cleaner because you're not trying to talk to several different lenders as well. So.
All right. And I do have one more thing to add. Is it going to be even more common too to see the loan servicer offer that second lien because they already hold the assumable portion? Is that another avenue that buyers can explore?
I do think that will become an option for sure, and it might be a simplification tool to go that route. However, not all servicers are in the business of loan origination, right? A lot of them are primarily focused on servicing those loans. Oftentimes they may be servicing for a third party, or they may be buying loans on the secondary market that they just hold in service.
All right. So here's another question. Can I get a pre-approval from a lender before making an offer on an assumption?
You want to tackle this one first, Randy?
Yeah. So the simple answer is yes. I actually do recommend it that you do get pre-approved with a lender, even if you're going to go the assumption route. One, if you're going to submit an offer on a property, in most cases, that property is probably going to be represented by an agent. That agent is going to probably ask you, hey, my seller would like to know if you've already spoken to any lender and what are you approved for, right? Based on today's rates. If you said no, that I haven't spoken to any lender, that is a concern potentially for the seller and the agent that you might not even qualify for the seller's loan. So my recommendation always is get pre-approved based on today's rates, just so you know where you fall. And the good news is that if you're going to take over an assumable loan, that interest rate should be a lot lower. So you should have no problem then qualifying for that loan with their lender servicing company that's going to have to pre-approve you. So you should do it, period. That's my quick answer too. Yes.
Okay, so thank you for that information. What about the role then of backup financing in an assumption? I would assume that in addition to being, a good idea to show to the listing agent and the seller, it could also serve as a backup, correct? In case the assumption doesn't work out for some reason and you still love the house.
Exactly. Yeah. So one of the things that I would like our clients or buyers to do when they speak to our lenders is I always say, hey, when you speak to the lender, ask them to give you a scenario. What would this same loan look like based on whatever your budget is per month, what would that same loan look like potentially if the interest rates were lower by 0.5%? Also, then ask the same lender, what would that monthly payment look like if the interest rate was lower by 1%? Right? Because then it gives you different scenarios to look at as a consumer and say, okay, so if I buy with today's rate, I can afford up to this amount based on my monthly budget. But if rates happen to drop, which they have dropped 0.5% within the last month, okay? Imagine you talked to that lender a month ago, and now all of a sudden, here we are. Rates are lower by 0.5%. You already have that scenario, and you know that you can either A, stay within that purchase price, which would mean your monthly payment goes down because of a lower interest rate, or you can increase your purchase power, right? And still maintain the monthly budget you want on the payment. And imagine if you then work with a good agent and they negotiate a seller credit for you, right? That you can then use to buy down the rate further. And all of a sudden you find yourself now not at a 6% rate, but now at a 5% rate traditionally. That could actually make more sense. And guess what? You already have that scenario from your lender if you follow my advice, right? So you know exactly what that would look like and how much purchasing power are you now able to increase, right? Or how much you can save on your monthly payment. It's your decision. But ultimately, it just gives you options to consider and not lock yourself in a box of doing the assumption only. Because the reality is, if you actually have to borrow the secondary financing, which is now going to be a lot easier, like I mentioned, in previous trainings, we mentioned that that rate is going to be higher, anywhere between 2 to 3 points higher. So if the interest rate is 6, secondary financing might be 8%. And if you're assuming a loan and that rate is 3%, but you're getting a secondary financing for $200,000 at 8%, and you have a blended rate and a blended payment, that math might not pencil for you, right? It actually might make more sense for you to go through the traditional route, use your VA financing if you're a VA buyer, not have to bring any gap, 100% finance it, and you might be able to get a property and the loan at a 5% rate, the traditional route, right? So that's why it's really good idea to always have open dialogue with a lender so you can look at all types of options and not be kind of confined only to an assumption.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah.
I would also say, you know, the factor to consider is, you know, a lot of people buying a home have to make a decision. What matters more? Does the payment matter more? Which payment matters a lot, obviously.
Yeah.
Or is it just the perfect house?
Yeah.
Right. And if you're looking at the assumption, and I don't know, we've seen scenarios where it's only for an entitlement swap and a VA deal, and somebody doesn't have sufficient entitlement to do a swap, and they can't do the assumption. Maybe they likely qualify for the assumption if they're going to qualify for backup financing, but they might have to say, you know what, this is the house I want to raise my family in, you know, and I'm going to switch to regular financing. We have seen a few deals where, you know, it's going through the assumption and people have run a concurrent backup financing loan to say, if this didn't get worked out right, and now these were more in the early days when this was sort of shaking out as to a viable option, but people were like, this is the house no matter what. If I can get the lower payment, yes, I'm going after it, but I'm not going to lose the house. I'll close on it either way, right? And so that's, I think, the best rule for knowing your backup financing options. Now, if it's all about payment and you can't get that assumption done, then there's not really a role for backup financing that I see. So,
all right, very good. So then, Craig, how can pre-vetting with your company Assumption Solutions fill a gap in the assumption versus the new loan process?
right. So, you know, Randy talked about talking to your lender up front, but, you know, a lot of lenders are kind of resistant to getting involved with people who are primarily looking to do an assumption because there's really not an income stream for them in that environment. And so where we were getting involved is primarily when deals were put together, buyer and seller had already been in the contract. And we saw a need where buyers were like, well, I want to do an assumption, but what is my range of what I need to be searching within as far as how I will get qualified with ultimately the end servicer. So we created a scenario where we would basically do the role of what a lender would do in a pre-qualification. Now, we don't use qualification because we don't offer financing, but we will take in all the stuff we would take in if you were in a contract. We will look at you in the same light, and we will be able to say, you should be able to get approved for an assumption up to 500,000 or 600,000 with a gap, assuming you need to fill a gap of up to 50,000 or 100,000, right? And that is going to give you something that's a tool to go out and use in your hunting process, or go out and use when you're talking to a potential seller to say, hey, I've already started this process. We do charge our engagement fee, which is $50 to do that, but then you have paid it. So then if you find an assumption out there that you get involved in, you don't have to pay us again on the engagement fee, right? Because we charge $750 per side. So we charge $50 engagement, $700 at assumption approval. You would only then, once you're in the deal, owe us the remaining $700 if your assumption is approved and cleared to close. So our goal with that is simply to fill a market need for potential clients.
Yeah, and I can speak firsthand, having one of our clients actually do that recently and submit their paperwork to Craig and his company, and literally next day, he was like, well, no, sorry, you won't qualify for this assumption or this purchase price because you just missed your entitlement amount by this much, right? Because this person in particular had another property in a different state, so I mean, man, you saved us days, months of headaches potentially, because otherwise we would have found that out probably at the last hour before, we were going to close.
Yeah. Had we not been, obviously, if we were involved in the deal when it went under contract, you'd have lost maybe a few days, but we saved anybody from even going in a contract. Yep. Without us, the entitlement issue, a lot of sellers and buyers would get caught because the servicer usually wouldn't check that until like right before closing. And that could have blown up that deal 3 months in. That's no fun. So.
Okay, so here are some things to discuss about taking title. First one, what is the role of a co-borrower exactly?
Yeah, so a co-borrower is basically someone who is used on the loan as part of the qualification process. The most common co-borrower is obviously spouses, right? But a non-spouse co-borrower is a real challenge in a VA assumption, primarily because the VA guarantee for that loan, which is what makes VA attractive to lenders, because they basically have a government entity guarantee on a default on that loan, it gets limited to the percentage of the owners that has the VA entitlement that is living in the property. It gets limited to them. So like if you had a co-borrower who was, let's say, a family member, not a non-spouse, this doesn't apply to a spouse at all, but was a family member like a father or I don't know, an uncle or anybody, right? They are the 50% of that buying group, but they don't live in that property. The guarantee is then reduced to only 50% of that loan. So lenders do not like it. So basically, it's really not possible to do a VA loan or a VA assumption with a non-owner occupying co-borrower, right? Spouse, not an issue at all. They don't have to be veterans or anything like that. So yeah, so you're really stuck. You have to qualify for this on yourself with your spouse, if you've got one, to be able to do this. You can't go out and get outside help. Now that is different though in FHA assumptions. FHA doesn't have any kind of guarantee about who occupies. If somebody's willing to be a co-borrower on an FHA, you can do that. So.
Oh, that's very interesting. To circle back around though to the VA, you said non-owner occupied. What if the buyer was, say, moving in with their elderly mother and wanted to put that mother on the title or on the loan for the assumption, and they were going to live with them?
Yeah, that is doable.
Okay, perfect. All right. So the next thing would be, what about buying? Well, you kind of already addressed this, but for those who are investors, I've been asked, can they purchase an assumption as an entity like an LLC?
They really can't, right? When you do any kind of VA government-backed loan, that loan is tied to an individual because VA, remember, is primarily for an owner occupant when they are buying it the first time. Now, you can do non-owner occupied assumptions if the entitlement is left by the seller, but that investor doing that scenario would have to do the assumption in their name, not the name of their LLC, because that loan has to get tied to somebody, not some entity that is not the person.
Now, Craig, is that also true with an FHA that an LLC would not be able to assume?
You actually can't do on FHA, you can't do an investor assumption. So it's not a thing at all.
Okay.
It's owner occupant only.
Okay, good clarification. And then that brings us to the last part, the occupancy requirements, which you did kind of touch on.
So maybe before we answer that last question, one thing I think let's just clarify too, though, if you are buying as an owner occupant, you are allowed later to put it in a trust, though. So
yeah, I mean, once again, what you do with your deed post purchase, there's a lot of flexibility there. Now, the one thing I do want to hammer, especially as we're talking with occupancy requirements on this question, right? Like, do not commit loan fraud. The VA is becoming quite aware that there is a rise of people buying as owner occupants and assumptions without the intention of owner occupancy. And that is really a no-no. Like you want to end up in jail. That's a great way to do it, right? If you're going to do an assumption, do it straight. You know, tell people I'm going to live in this or I'm not going to live in this, right? You know, obviously with occupancy requirement for entitlement to swap, you know, you have to have the VA entitlement as the buyer and the seller, and you have to be living in the property as your primary residence when you close. The rule with regards to how long you have to live in is more murky, right? It's more about intent. People's life circumstances change. I mean, think of service members who move to an area and then their duty station changes rapidly and they have to ship out somewhere else. It may not make sense to sell the home, so they have to turn it into a rental, right? I personally think, you know, if your intention is I'm going to live in the house, but I do want it to be a rental someday, I would really want to just say I'm going to be here for at least a minimum of a year, right? But life circumstances can change and you can go that route from there. I don't know, any other things you want to cover on this, Randy?
I'll just finish that. You know, if you change title after the fact, just know that the lender can exercise their due on sale clause, which is in the loan documents that you're signing. So that's the challenge you run into. And of course, you know, there's a lot of talk out there like, oh, they don't ever do it. It has happened. I've heard of very, very few of them. You don't want to be that person, maybe.
Now, I will say though, in the case of a trust, though, there is a legal precedent for moving a property into a trust that does not trigger the due on sale clause, but moving the property from your name to ABC Rentals LLC would probably be something that the lender could go, Nope, we're going to call that.
Yep, that's what I wanted to cover. So perfect.
Okay.
We're good.
Okay, so as we know, there have been some changes recently with the National Association of Realtors. We've had a lot of people asking about this as they're trying to figure out how this might affect them. So, what is the NAR settlement exactly?
All it's really doing, it's just changing how commission is being paid, to be quite simplest. Meaning, previously, in what was happening when a listing agent met with the seller, they were signing a commission agreement usually for 5-6%, and then that listing broker was cooperating with the buyer broker and giving usually half of that 5 or 6 to the buyer broker. So the payment was going from the seller to the seller's broker, and then the seller broker was paying the buyer's broker. That's no longer allowed. Now the payment goes from the seller if the seller chooses to pay the buyer's broker. So it skips over the listing broker, and the seller can pay directly to the buyer's broker if they choose to, or they can offer a seller concession to cover the buyer's broker commission that the buyer is paying for themselves.
Yes, so yeah, that is the big question. How does it impact a seller and a buyer when it comes to an assumption?
Right. So I've actually had some agents ask me this, right? Because we could be in a scenario where a home is for sale and the seller is not offering to pay the agent that brings the buyer to that sale a fee. And quite frankly, I don't know anybody who's going to do any work without getting paid in any industry, much less the real estate industry, right? And so that buyer's broker may have to go back to his buyer and say, hey, if you want my help in this deal, here is the fee that you'd have to pay me. Well, with VA loans, traditionally it has been that buyers could not pay commission, right? But the VA did come out and say that they were going to, one, put a hold on that rule and likely come up with some rules that change that, because the VA does not want their veterans to be disadvantaged in buying homes against people getting a conventional mortgage, right? And so that is going to ultimately change. But I also don't think that it benefits a seller to push any potential buyer away, because what I'm seeing in the real estate market right now, there are buyer brokers who are calling listing brokers and trying to say, okay, are you offering a co-op commission of whatever percentage, right? And I can imagine what is going on is that brokers that are saying, no, we are not offering one, that buyer broker goes, okay, thank you, hangs up the phone and never sets a showing because their buyer client cannot afford to not only bring their down payment, maybe their closing costs, and a buyer agent commission. So that's not a house for them to buy. So they're going to get handicapped, and from my view, if they're not willing to incentivize buyer brokers to bring their buyers to see their homes. So the impact I see is just, I guess, maybe more negotiation clarity in how commissions are paid. I don't think it simplified things for buyers or sellers personally, but it's just one more piece to be cognizant of and reason to have good guidance in a real estate transaction. You know, I mean, another reason for people to reach out to you guys at Assumable Sales to get connected with good agents around the country who can explain this and go over this in detail with how it's going to work. But it shouldn't, the NAR settlement should not be something that makes people shy away from chasing assumptions, because it's not going to affect them any differently than if they were not chasing an assumable mortgage.
All right. Well, thank you, Randy and Craig, for joining us for this Q&A. We are here to help you in whatever your needs are.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be a resource. Obviously, we put lots of great content out at our website, assumptionsolutions.com. Our role is to help you get from contract to close with the least amount of pain and problems. And we think we do a very good job at doing it all across the nation in all 50 states. So feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Thanks for doing this with us. And for us, our role for you is to basically match you up with great agents across the country that understand assumptions, so we can make this happen for you, right? If you're a seller, sell and leverage your assumable loan to get more eyes on your property, right? And then if you're a buyer, get you into a home with that great rate. And then hopefully we can engage with Craig in the process to make that a little smoother for all parties involved. So either way, we're here to help you. Let us know. Rebecca and I are always available. And if you have any other questions, please let us know. And we're going to be doing these on an ongoing basis for you.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you.